Well, last year at this time, there was not a Derby prep on the calendar here in the middle of March, but this year there is. It's the Virginia Derby. It used to be on the turf. Now it's on the dirt. Used to be run in the summer. Now it's in the spring, and 50 points will go to the winner. We'll talk about that, and we'll start to unveil our top Derby horses and maybe some that we're not as into as others. It's Bailey Armour and I, and it's Horse Sense. Next.
Welcome back to another episode of Horse Sense. As always, I'm Bailey Armour, joined alongside the indubitous Scott Shapiro. And this week, we're going to take a look at the Virginia Derby at Colonial Downs. Like Scott said in our cold open there, this used to be a summer race, wasn't a race on the Derby Trail, was a turf race. And now they've made an agreement where this is going to be a 50-point race on the road to the Kentucky Derby with Colonial's first ever 4-day all dirt meet in the spring. So I'm excited to see what they can kind of come up with this product. Of course, we've got a special promotion to go alongside that. As part of our $10 Triple Crown Trail Money Back Special series, you'll get your money back up to $10 if the horse you bet to win in the Virginia Derby at Colonial on Saturday comes in second or third. And I believe that's race 9, isn't it, Scott?
Race number 9, yeah.
All right, lucky number 9. So make sure you opt into that promotion. Check out the rest of the calendar of promotions on Xpressbet and FirstBet this week.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I don't know what kind of agreement that you were speaking of. I think Churchill Downs looked in the mirror and shook their hands with their race, created the Virginia Derby. I don't mind the idea, Bailey, of Virginia. They're trying, they're trying to, kind of create a more powerful racing product or a new product, if you will, in that state. I like that idea. What I don't like is giving this race 50 points right off the rip. I understand on the schedule, all the other races are 50 points. They could build up with the Virginia Derby because these horses are shipping in. This is not a normal stop on the Derby Trail. And let's be honest, there will be there's always other 50-point races that aren't awesome either, but those kind of go here and there and are kind of dependent on the year. This is a little bit of a reach. I would have preferred to see it as a 20-point race, but looking forward to it as well, and the money back special. Well, we've kind of touched on the Virginia Derby, both in the cold open and then in your intro, Bailey, but it is the feature race of the day, and specifically on the road to the Derby, $500,000. We talked about moving from the turf to the dirt and moving up in the calendar, 50 points to the winner. Getaway Car is the 9-5 favorite. This horse is 3-time winner for Bob Baffert. Kind of an underwhelming effort as the 6-5 favorite in the Sunland Derby, off a little bit of a layoff, holding off Caldera for my racehorse. But, you do have to like the fact that off a little bit of a layoff, he did show some grit, at least, and determination when it looked like he might be getting passed. John Hancock scratched as the second choice on the line, and then there's Rapture, who's 5-1, won't be 5-1, is 5-1 on the line. He's going to be the second choice, if not kind of the co-favorite with Getaway Car, in my estimation. I think the rest of them will have to run much better to beat both of these, or at least one of them. And I'm going to assume the horse I'm going to try to talk you off is one of those that has a really significant chance, but don't let me put words into your mouth.
Hey, you know me well enough at this point to kind of suss out my picks for sure. Yeah, I think the strongest horse that I've identified in this race this week is definitely Rapture for me. Nothing against Getaway Car. I just don't think he's a standout as some of the other Bafferts, excuse me. And so for that reason, I'm going to try to play against him. Now, I don't know how much of a price we're going to get with Rapture. Like he said, probably co-favorite, if not, 5-1 versus Getaway Car's 4-5 with Rapture. But as we know, this horse has the same connections as John Hancock, who was originally entered in this race, who I really liked going into the Sam Davis. And then they chose not to run him in here, find a different spot instead, thus leaves Rapture to kind of take home this race all to himself. His first lifetime stakes appearance. He just broke his maiden last out, but like I said, same connections. They're really confident on this horse, and this is a horse that's been training down at Payson Park, shipped to Oaklawn to break the maiden, and then now ships all the way up to Colonial. So the fact that they're willing to send this horse so far away from his home base instead of sending him to maybe the Fountain of Youth or something closer to home makes me think they're pretty keen on him. And for me, it's Rapture all the way.
Well, full disclosure, Rapture is my top pick as well in the Virginia Derby. But believe me, it's not as if I think he can't lose and doesn't have potential knocks in the race. Now, in terms of a ceiling, I think the one thing he definitely presents is the biggest ceiling in this field. You look around, there's a lot of other horses that have had far more chances than him, including Getaway Car, who really has never passed a horse in the lane. So he still has that on top of other things to conquer as he moves closer to the Kentucky Derby or his next bigger races, maybe tougher fields, you would assume. I was hoping you would give me Getaway Car to talk you off. But for Rapture, let's look at this. Well, first off, I do think it's very impressive that he ran as well as he did in a one-turn mile race to kick off his career. It's not easy to win at a one-turn mile. Very difficult task if you're not completely fit, and especially without experience. The thing is, Vassimo, who came back to win for Pletcher, was also a firster. And they were the two favorites. So it wasn't as if there were horses with experience in there. The biggest knock, though, to me on him, he was great in his race against horses he was expected to beat at Oaklawn, is he's not experienced and he's coming like everybody else into a racetrack we've never seen him race over. So that could be reasons to take shots against both favorites. The lack of what we know, history in these types of races, not only for these horses, but in general, for 3-year-olds this time of the year racing over the surface. We don't know how the course is going to play. We don't know how they'll take to the surface. There's going to be a crowd there. Perhaps that will have a bearing on how they act in the walking ring and in the paddock. And then the experience edge that he's going to give up to everybody else. So he's probably, I think we're probably looking at like a 2-to-1 even money-ish type deal. Maybe, that would probably be fair for Rapture. And at that price, there's definitely questions to be answered. If he was going to be 5-to-1, I would have a far more difficult time, really pressing to talk you off Rapture this time. But he's the one to beat, in my opinion, as well.
So you mentioned just before we close out this segment here that it's really hard for horses to win going a one-turn mile as their debut or as younger horses. For some of our viewers that might be newer to the game, could you kind of explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, the one turn, a lot of mile races, like the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. If you watch that out in Southern California, that's a 2-turn race. Some tracks, though, and some of the tracks that we follow most have the 1-turn variety, meaning horses break and it's like a sprint. You're on the back stretch out of a chute, and then you're just going around the far turn and then racing into the wire. It takes, first off, part of the 2-turn game is that's mental is more than physical. It takes a smart horse to be able to navigate turns, to be able to conserve their energy, those types of things. But at first asking, the 1-turn mile, it's a combination of sprint and endurance is needed. Speed and endurance is needed, whereas a route race mostly is about endurance. So having that combination of speed, which a lot of first-time starters will have, and endurance, well, that comes with foundation. That makes it more challenging. So you're going fast early and you're still needed to go fast late, whereas in a route, you're more relaxed in the early stages. Well, we've talked a lot about the Derby preps leading up to the Virginia Derby, of course, and the Virginia Derby this week, but the biggest races are still yet to come starting next week. 100 points to the winner. You got the Louisiana Derby and the Jeff Ruby Stakes 2 weeks from now, or a couple days from 2 weeks from now. The biggest day of the Derby prep season for first racing at Santa Anita with the Santa Anita Derby, and of course, the Florida Derby down in Gulfstream. But we thought it would be a good time to kind of answer a few questions. Not a top 10, but, you could make some inferences on what our top 10 might be based on these few questions. But I'll throw this first one to you, Bailey, and it's kind of the obvious one first. If the Derby was today, who would your pick be?
If the Derby was today, I think the horse that I am probably the most keen on is Sovereignty right now. I was the most impressed with his performance in the Fountain of Youth out of the Derby preps we've seen so far. Do I think he's like far and away the best horse of the field? No. And of course, crazy stuff happens in the Derby all the time. I know that you're probably pretty keen on journalism after the Santa Anita race there.
Segment, No.
But after when we did our recap there, we kind of maybe butted heads a little bit on who was better, journalism or sovereignty. And for me personally, as it stands now, I think the Dolphins really searching for that big win. So sovereignty on top.
Well, you're wrong. That's the thing. But we already talked about it. You
Ooh.
admitted you were, no, I'm just kidding. We did butt heads, and we will continue to at least for another a week or two. We might get some more answers. And then obviously, ultimately on the first Saturday in May, and from there, the Preakness and the Belmont. But if they, so choose and so make it. But yeah, it is journalism for me. I like his tactical speed. I think he could be on the lead if it presented him. But, you look at the potential field at this point. I don't think that's going to happen. You've got a horse like Barnes. You've got a Longshot that I think you're going to talk about a little later if he gets in the field, amongst many other speed horses that seem to be, in the field. But in that type of situation, sure, a closer will make sense. But I prefer always to kind of have that option. And if maybe the speed doesn't go as fast, one of these years, the Derby isn't going to be quite as quick. But yeah, it's journalism for me. I've talked for a number of years about my respect for Michael McCarthy. Was always suspecting that he might have a Derby written, on his resume at some point. And maybe this is the year with journalism. Let's turn that around, though. There's kind of this top tier of horses that have come off of, big efforts, last out, or, in the, not necessarily wins. Barnes is still amongst people. They're top several, but who is kind of that horse in that top tier or so that maybe you're not as high on as others? And is it journalism?
Well, journalism, not necessarily. Yes, of course, we have talked about that. I'm not as keen on journalism. Oh, sorry, a bag just fell over underneath me. Not as keen on journalism as you are. I do really like journalism's physical form, but out of the top 10 horses that have the most points on the leaderboard right now, the one I'm fading is Chancer McPatrick. I know that he's not in the top 5. I know there are some people that like him, but for him, his pedigree, his second dam was a standout juvenile, winning the Alcibiades at Keeneland and the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, and then never won again. And he's looking to pick up, that first place trophy again for the first time back in his 3-year-old campaign. And I just don't think he can do it. I don't think that he's come back into the same form that he had in his 2-year-old year. And so I'm going to toss Chance McPatrick. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? We still have a while to the Derby, but I just don't think he's that good.
That's brave of you to toss a 20 or 30 to 1 shot. That's, really, really brave.
So I'm so brave. I'm just so brave.
I'm just kidding. We didn't specify, and I was the one that created the questions. I'm just giving Bailey a hard time. I do agree. I'm not very keen on Chancer McPatrick. He did run second last out, but he kind of had he had a really good trip. I mean, I know it was his first race, and Owen Almighty was on the lead and he was chasing him, but I was a little bit underwhelmed by that effort, and going in, I was not high on his chances as the morning line favorite. I'll be a little more aggressive, actually a lot more aggressive. And I actually like this horse significantly more than Chancer McPatrick's chances. So take that for what you will. But Citizen Bull to me might be a little bit a little bit dressed up, I think is the word I want to use. He has been really good, so it's hard to knock him. But both of those races for Citizen Bull, and I purposely left him off of the speed horses that I was discussing a moment ago because I knew I was going to talk about him. But he so far has not shown any ability to do anything but go to the lead, and he's been one big races doing it. So it's hard to knock him. I just don't see a scenario where he's going to be able to control an early tempo like he did in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and he did last out in his first start as a 3-year-old. And that first start as a 3-year-old, and even the Juvenile, when you look back at who he beat, do we know those horses are significantly better than the horses he's about to face or even close to it? So to me, Citizen Bull is one of the favorites right now. I think he's going to need things to go his way in the Derby. And we don't know the field yet, but given the fact that I do think there's plenty of other speed at the moment, I'm going to say Citizen Bull would be the vulnerable one for me.
I take it. I respect that.
Well, now let's see what you got here, and I think you'll come through on this. It's about a long shot. I hope you don't pick a 5-1, or something like that. But who's your long shot? We talked about the horse we like, the Derby horse that we're, would top pick. Who you tell your parents or your friends to bet, who's going to win, Bailey.
Those inevitable Derby day texts. Yeah,
right. All of them, yes. But now, who's the long shot horse that you? Maybe even the people that don't know that much about racing, you probably wouldn't even say use underneath because they wouldn't know what you mean. But who was that horse that maybe you think is a little sneaky now? Maybe they can win. Maybe they're just flying under the radar now. It doesn't mean that they're have to pick up the pieces type horse. But who is that on your radar right now?
Well, if you don't know what use underneath means, to use Scott's term, for him, that means a horse you're going to include in your wagers and maybe a third or fourth place position if you're playing a trifecta or superfecta. And that horse for me, which will shock literally no one, is of course Speed King, a horse that I've been pretty keen on in some of these Midwest Derby preps. Second in the Springboard Mile to the horse that's number one in points on the Kentucky Derby leaderboard right now, Coal Battle for trainer Lonnie Briley, that really nice Texas bred horse. Speed King, of course, won the Southwest and then disappointing in the Rebel, lost again to Coal Battle, but hopefully he can kind of come back into form as we get closer to that first Saturday in May, pick up some more points, and then maybe sneak in there in a try or in a super.
Is Coal Battle a Texas bred? I thought he was just from the South. Isn't he a Kentucky bred?
He might be a Kentucky bred that went through a Texas
Yeah,
sale. I know he's
yeah, I think
sold
that
in
might
a
be it.
Texas auction
Oh
for
yeah,
like 70 grand. That might be
okay.
where the Texas
He's a cool
Association comes
story. I don't
from.
think he's quite fast enough, but it would be. I mean, he's the best story going for the Derby if
Yeah, it's a
possible.
good story
Lonnie
for sure.
Briley. Yeah, Speed King to me, the problem with him is again, I mean, how many speed horses have we already just talked about? And maybe that's a good reason
Funny.
to really like Sovereignty, who I talk about, having only one way to win, but that way might just happen once again. It's obviously happened a few times recently. Rich Strike, Mage, to name two. But for me, it's going to be a closer type, and it's a horse that you actually liked last week. I hope he gets in the field. He's got work to do still with one start left, but that's Hill Road. Um,
Whoa!
this is a horse that if you just watched the race at Tampa and didn't watch the after the finish, you might say, "Well, Scott, why would you be against Chancer McPatrick before Hill Road? Chancer was ahead of him every step of the way." Well, that was true, because of what we call the race shape. The race shape set up for horses that were closer up to the pace, but more so, I think that maybe both horses were not ridden necessarily to win, or weren't. I wouldn't say ridden to win, but cranked to win, with the goal being, to really ride, to get the best out of them in this race. It really seemed like it was a somewhat of a workout for Hill Road, who got a third, broke well, was taken back. We knew he'd be far behind, but if you watch the gallop out, it was with intent. Not only was it good, which is often important, but can also be horses that just run on too late sometimes. This was intent, though. This horse was set to run further than the distance of the race and to do it almost like a workout. And with Chad Brown having that plan, if he can get him to the race, he's going to be third off the layoff. And I think he has the ability to get the distance, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's finishing well. So for me, it's Hill Road, and I think this was a pretty good conversation as we kind of lead into Louisiana next week for what's one of the bigger, one of the top few preps in Louisiana Derby.
As always, thank you so much for watching another episode of Horse Sense. I'm Bailey Armour, and of course was joined today, as usual, by the incredible Scott Shapiro. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you leave a comment down below and let us know who you like on this year's Triple Crown Trail. Now, before we say goodbye today, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you we've got a new meatball alert. If you've been following us for a while, you know that there's a horse I worked with last summer in the Adam Rice barn named Close the Game Sugar, who's a very, very good racehorse. He's back, entered at Fairgrounds this week in the Whitmore Stakes, post position number 8. Close the Game Sugar. Go bet him. Tell him I sent you. Meatball watch. Good luck, Meatball. And we'll see who comes out on top in that race and the Virginia Derby this Saturday.